Hello, and welcome back to week 2 of NFL football and astrology. My name is Jess, and I'm with
Dorje, Kirsten. Hello, everybody.
Hi. We are super excited to explore the Bears versus the Lions this week, which is September 14th, 2025. And we are still polishing our process, but as we get into this, we have a little bit more detail. We have a little bit more visual components to enjoy, and we do hope that you enjoy it.
Yeah, thank you. And really, what a great and fantastic start to this season. I mean, it already seems like it broke down into like, oh, there's some top tier teams, but they're not who you think they are. Like the Lions lost, which we'll be covering today. Then also the Kansas City Chiefs lost. My dear
No.
team, the Seattle Seahawks lost. I guess that was expected, but there are some like real upheavals or some changes or some transformations which I think is to be expected in the context of, well, the opening of the season is during eclipse season. So we do have like surprises coming out. And maybe there's teams that are looking really poor initially that are going to get a lot stronger as the season goes on, as the eclipses move through and the eclipse season ends, and then something new comes in. But
Yes.
I was really happy, and I felt like we had a really good predictive call of last week's game. What did you think, Jess?
I think we did pretty good for our first week working together. I think, we did predict accurately the winning team. And also, Dorje, I know I mentioned this to you, but I just can't get over how on point you were with noting with the sun conjoining Pluto that somebody right out of the gate was going to get injured. And that is exactly what happened during the game.
Right, that is. And we said that the Eagles would win, which is what
Yes.
happened. And we
Yes.
said the Cowboys would cover the spread, which is also what happened. I think
Yes.
I was a little bit harsh on Dak Prescott. He performed a lot better than I thought he would. He came out of the gate pretty strong. And the Eagles, like you suggested, you said, well, they don't look like they're that kind of coagulated or have come together yet. They looked like a really weak team in that game.
Yes.
And it was very surprising to me.
Exactly, especially because they just came off of a Super Bowl run. You would think that they were looking especially together, and that just wasn't the case. So it'll be interesting to see how they perform as the year progresses, the season progresses, I should say.
Yeah, that's right. And we did say that they would beat this prop spread, which they
Yeah.
did. The total was over. Also predicted that Jalen Hurts would get at least one touchdown. He did that, and by that he put the ball in the end zone himself. It wasn't just a passing
Yes.
touchdown. So he had that. And then also a CeeDee Lamb over 70 receiving yards. That worked. But Dak Prescott did not throw an interception. I thought he would, so I missed out on that one.
Yeah.
That being the case, what's this week's game, Jess?
Yes, so today we're looking at the Bears entering the Lions' den. We're going to see how they're performing. The Lions just came off of a pretty bad loss against Green Bay. We saw the same happen with the Bears, though the Bears, there was only a 3-point loss. It was still significant because the Vikings put up, I think, 21 points in the fourth quarter alone, and that was Monday night. So they're still very much in that space. The Lions, as we know, were pretty dominant last year, did not look good to begin the season. Both of these teams, I think, are looking for an early season redemptive arc. Yes, this early in the season, because one of these two teams will have to be 0-2 at the end of this game. And so the way that I want to preface by saying the spirit of sports astrology is part of it is the excitement of trying to predict it, but I'm still learning again that the accuracy is it's a little bit of a toss up. And what Frawley notes is if there is not a clear favorite, the method that he utilizes is not even valid. And so I think that that's important to keep in mind as we enter this space. I would love to be accurate every week, of course, but that is a factor at play here. Now, are you okay with me delving into Frawley? How do you want to go about this?
Absolutely. I do have a comment and, much
Please.
appreciation to Frawley. He's been far more prolific and productive and studied than I will probably ever be in my life. But isn't that a cop out? If there's not a clear favorite, it doesn't work. I mean, come on. We're,
I know.
trying to suss out the like little details here.
Yes, no, I agree with that. And I was just like, okay, I guess we just give it up if that's not the case. But there was a favorite in, at least as far as betting was going yesterday. And it seems like the Lions are projected to be the favorite to win the game. And so that's where I'm predicting from where that is concerned. So I made a spreadsheet. Dorje knows this. I made a spreadsheet going point by point with every single one of what Frawley suggests we look at. It's very much looking at, here's a point for the favorite, here's a point for the underdog, here's a point for the favorite, and then the underdog. And then what you take is whatever has the stronger signature, basically. So if the favorite has 5 points for them and there's 3 points for the underdogs, we would go with the favorite as the projected win. With that in mind, only 3 of the techniques from Frawley's method actually mapped onto this chart. And I'm going to try to keep it simple because, I can get really carried away with the astrological language. So the first thing that we're going to look at is the moon. The moon, according to Frawley, is associated with the flow of the events. And when the moon is in one of the team's houses, it's like a surge of energy toward that team. Now, what's important to note is this is using the Placidus house system. Dorje will be using the whole sign. I tend to prefer the Placidus house system, but I go between the two. Frawley is staunchly Placidus. And with that in mind, we see the moon, I should say, is still in the 7th house, but it's far from the descendant. And per Frawley, this is kind of like negligible in impact, but the moon is still in the 7th house. I still think that it's worth considering. There's not a lot of signifiers for this game. And so because the 7th house is associated with the underdog, the moon is offering a boost in favor of the underdog based on its positioning. Now, again, we could probably argue that because it's not super close to the descendant, it's not super helpful, but I just wanted something to talk about. So this is 1 point for the underdog. Next, Frawley uses the part of fortune and the antiscion a lot, or antiscia. I don't, so I might be mispronouncing that, and I apologize if I am. But the part of fortune for this game is actually at 2 degrees in the sign of Virgo, and then the antiscion of the part of fortune is at like 27 degrees Aries. And what we notice in this space is that the moon is applying to a sextile with the antiscion of the part of fortune. And so, as you can imagine, there's a lot of specifics about what that means and how that's impacting both teams. But the shorthand is that's a point for the favorites. So now we have 1 point for the underdogs, which in this case would be the Bears, 1 point for the favorites. And the part that I got tripped up on, which Dorje, you may have thoughts about, is that anything to do with the part of fortune or the part of fortune's antiscion is final. And so there are 2 judgments, this one that we just reflected on, and the next one, which are considered final judgments. And they're both for the opposite team. So I don't really know what to do with that. You may have some ideas. The last piece is, again, related to the part of fortune, which, again, it's at 2 degrees in the sign of Virgo. And it is the Lord of the first house, which is the favorite. So that would be the lion. They are associated with this Libra Mars at 24 degrees in the sign of Libra, of course, but in the 11th house. This Lord is opposing the antiscion of the part of fortune, which is, again, at 27 degrees. Yes, 27 degrees Aries. And so that favors the underdog. So here again, the favorite is getting a lot of support with its aspects to Fortuna. And then we also see that the underdog is getting substantial support with this opposition we just identified. But if we are also including the moon, which I would like to include, then we would say that Frawley is suggesting that the underdog wins, which is the Bears.
Well, yeah. Just out of curiosity, do you know his theory, or could you theorize about his theory of why the part of fortune is so important in determining the outcome of the game?
Absolutely. So in reading this chapter of his book, Sports Astrology, he is basically like, forget everything you know about horary astrology or anything formal. This is really based on experience and kind of how he has been tinkering with this methodology. And it's very much like the lords of the angular houses. So the 1st, the 4th, the 7th, and the 10th for the favorites and the underdogs. And then the moon representing the flow of the events, aspects to the moon, aspects to the part of fortune, which, as we know, is associated with the moon. All of that tends to reflect, again, how that game is progressing, how it's informing the individual experiences of these teams. But he did say repeatedly, it's like, well, I just kind of figured it out and it seems to work, and that's that.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
Hey, what about your thoughts about it? I'm just going to warn the audience here. I believe Jess is a fan of the Lions, so
I
she
am indeed.
might be bringing a little bias
I
into
am.
her predictive methodology, which is okay. We'll do the Seahawks one week, and you'll see my bias just like all over the place.
Yes, my 2025 bingo this year, a lot of it was like predictions that held up, but one of those squares was the Lions would win the Super Bowl, and we know how that went. So I am a little bit partial, but I do have very different thoughts about how this game is going to go. Now, I do want to note, Dorje, specifically, you mentioned you need to look at how the game progresses and help to shape some of my personal thoughts. And so I want to credit you specifically for that because I never did that before. The halves matter. Go, if you want to please talk.
Oh yeah, no. So the halves matter, the progression of the games matter. One of my favorite things to do, and if you're a young budding astrologer who also likes football, or for that matter, baseball or soccer, then a great thing to do is to open up the chart and have the clock running while the game is going. Because like I mentioned last time, you can actually see events happen when the ascendant makes aspects to various pivotal points within the chart, be it a planet or be it the part of fortune, or if the moon shifts a sign. So there's a lot of the story that is found in the game of the chart evolving and moving. Particularly, though, it was Bernadette Brady who expresses that really, like, you can get a game where everything is going for the team that you predicted to win based on the start of the game. And then the second half comes in and the whole script flips. And what's
Yeah.
happening at that point in time is that you have a different planet ruling the ascendant and the descendant, which
Yes.
are, the primary forces that are interacting as the story of the chart is being told. I do find it to be useful. And it did seem to be useful last game too.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it seems helpful in this case, but we'll see.
Right, because with the last game, then the Cowboys and the Eagles at high scoring at the beginning of the game, which we saw, and then when the houses shifted, it became a low scoring defensive match, which we also saw. So
Yeah.
so it is something that you actually see as the game progresses.
Absolutely. Yeah, that is a great point, and that's so valuable in this space, especially for people who want to explore this facet of astrology for themselves.
For themselves,
So,
also for prop bets.
yes,
Yeah.
that's actually really key. And that's where you are the master of prop bets. I am still learning. I am not
Right.
worthy, but I do have very different thoughts, and I just have my notes. So excuse me. I always write it on my notes app. But I like to look at what the Sabian symbol of the midheaven is doing at the start of the game. We would look at the
Cool.
degree ahead. So that would be 15 degrees in the sign of Virgo. Do I remember it off the top of my head? Of course not. But I look at the key words associated with that degree, and it's been working pretty okay. I did it for the Bears game on Monday, and I was like, there's a lot of whistles in the first quarter. And there were. There was like 2 timeouts in the first 5 minutes. There was a lot of false starts. It was interesting. So I noticed there is a commentary about appearance and how people are dressing with regards to the Sabian symbol. And so I was curious if there may be slightly different jerseys or like the appearance of the jerseys. So the Lions may have a different helmet color or jersey style, something like that. Of course, that's more of a fun prediction than anything meaningful, but nonetheless. Now, I always look at the ascendant as the away team. And so in this case, the start of the game, we have the ascendant as this very debilitated Mars in the sign of Libra. But what's unique this week compared to last week is there's an opposition with Chiron that's pretty close in applying. We also have the exact sextile with Venus, which is nice. And there's also some support for the moon. The descendant is the home team, which in this case would be the Lions, ruled by this Venus in the sign of Leo. So there's also just this nice sort of dynamic of energy at play, which for me is like, oh, this is a fun game to watch. That's what I'm seeing here. It's kind of like the artistry of football, in my opinion. I do think, though, that this opposition between Mars and Chiron is not great for the away team. Again, the Bears. I think that the home team is more energized, but because this Venus and Leo is ruled by the sun, still conjoining the South Node, they're not looking as robust as they did last season. Because it's separating from the South Node, it seems like the Lions are on the up and up, which we do love to see. I also think that they may be leaving behind last week's failures. Whereas I kind of looked at Mars between the 11th and then the 12th house whole sign for the Bears as like they're still in their feelings about that loss last week because it shouldn't have happened. That was a rookie quarterback for the Vikings. It was the first time he was on the field to put up that many points in the last quarter. Must be a lot to navigate, but nonetheless. I do think that Detroit is showing cohesive team effort, collaborative work, and we see this with the IC in the sign of Pisces. It would be in the fifth house whole sign with Saturn and Neptune in the sixth house. So yeah, I do think that the home team is looking more like a home team that's here to work. I did push the game ahead, as I mentioned. At 2 p.m., we see the ascendant shift into the sign of Sagittarius. So the game seems to start with Detroit as the upper hand. The ascendant then shifts to the exalted Jupiter, which looks good for the Bears, but the descendant will have the moon still as kind of part of the conversation, but the moon specifically is ruled by an exalted Mercury. So I kind of think that the Lions still have the upper hand. It might be more of an even playing field as we get toward the half. And then once we hit 3:30, which I'm assuming would be toward the end of the game, the ascendant will be at 0 degrees in the sign of Capricorn, ruled by a critical degree Pisces. Saturn, descendant ruled by, are we right here? Yes, we are right. The descendant will be ruled by the moon in the sign of Gemini. There's a square between the two of them. And I think that I don't know. It's interesting. Maybe you have some thoughts about the square between the moon and Saturn that you may want to add on, but I just kind of see this as the Lions are able to keep the upper hand, but overall it is a good game. And so my prediction is the Lions win. Frawley said the Bears win. Please tell me what you're feeling, Dorje.
Oh, I mean that was a lot. That was really beautiful, Jess.
I'm sorry.
No, absolutely appreciate it. I'm going to go back to the Sabian symbols to start, and I love
Sure.
that you brought in the Sabian symbols. I believe the Sabian symbol for 15 degrees Virgo is an ornamental handkerchief. Does that
Yes,
sound
yes,
right? Yes.
that
Yeah.
sounds right.
And so you say that you put it up there with the South Node. I am a little bit triggered into thinking that there's a controversial yellow flag that lands
Ooh,
on the field and maybe swings the game a certain way at some point during the game, with that being the
interesting.
Sabian symbol. Because,
Yeah.
yeah, ornamental handkerchief, yellow flag, the two seem to relate to each other maybe in a little bit. So I'm like, okay, well, there goes the ref. They're going to throw a flag, and someone's going to say, oh, they shouldn't have done that. I don't know. Well, Troy Aikman isn't calling the game, so there might not be a big deal coming out of it, but but there may be a controversy there. Um, the Moon square Saturn, I have uh, on my display of the game chart. I have that's the second half. On the first half, I have the prop bets, and I was calling for taking the over. I am going to be a little bit hesitant to do that now that you pointed out that the moon is square Saturn there. That
Okay.
seems to me like that's a little bit of a restraint based on the
Yeah.
air yardage. Now, both of these quarterbacks do like slinging it, but
Yeah.
to me, I'd say, well, maybe they do get the over still. The over is 46.5. That's 23 points per team. On a good day, Detroit can put up 46 on their own.
Yeah.
So taking that over seems like an easy way to go, but that also says to me perhaps there's an interception of Jared Goff in the second half.
Ooh,
Like a
interesting.
Saturn comes and gets that. Another thing you're talking about the moon, I mean Mars opposed Chiron.
Yes.
I don't like that in terms of an injury too. To me, that looks like a really kind of a challenging injury might occur. Could you put up the first half chart?
Absolutely. So I have this chart and I have this one. I do not
Oh
have the
yeah.
first half listed.
Okay.
Is this comfortable?
Yeah, that's comfortable.
Okay.
So then with the first half, I was looking at it as Sagittarius first house using the whole signs. The descendant at roughly 28 degrees Scorpio. So it's just in those final degrees of Scorpio. That would put the Lions, who according to the Bears, who according to Bonatti are the challenging team because they're on the home field turf of the Lions. That would put them as being ruled by Mars in the 12th house in Libra. And to me, that also speaks, like you said, to them being the Bears being emotionally not sure how to handle the loss that they had last week. It was not a clean loss. There's a lot of emotionality involved when a football team seems like they should win and then they suddenly completely blow it.
Yeah.
There's this question of like, what did we do wrong? Can we pull it together? Can we win? Because even when we're really ahead, we lose. And I think that is weighing on the team's mind here. The descendant is going to be ruled by Venus. Venus is in the 10th house by whole sign at the
Yes.
moment that the game starts. And it's also in Leo. And to me, that's confirms that the seventh house is represented by by Venus, because it is the dominant team. It's the team projected to win. It's in the 10th house. It's the lords to be beaten, the lords to be overthrown. And one of the things that we get with that is we get Venus having mutual reception with the sun and with Mars. And
Oh.
to me, that speaks to Jared Goff, who is really this like hot and cold quarterback, not in the sense that you can't count on him, but in the sense that when he is off, he is so incredibly off.
Yeah.
But when he is on, he is so incredibly on.
Yes.
Most of the time when he's on, last week he was not. And that's part of why Green Bay was so easily able to win. But if he's on, he can just carve up even the best defenses in the NFL.
Yeah.
And I don't think the Bears have, if we're lucky if they have a middling defense at this point. And
Yes.
I think he's going to carve them up. I think that's represented by Venus being, in terms of Leo, being the quarterback, and then just like having this mutual reception with the sun representing the quarterback, the leader of the team, and Mars representing decisiveness. So I think he's going to come in with a lot of decisiveness, and he's going to be able to, I mean, look at that. They're sextile by degree.
Yeah.
He is going to be just really fierce with how he throws the ball around the first half.
Yeah.
As we move into the second half, as your chart shows, then the chart ruler switches to Virgo. I mean, Mercury in Virgo up there coming out of combustion. And to me, this is a second testimony to what you're talking about, which is coming out of being blown out, like
Yeah.
the combustion process being blown out. So it's coming out of it, moving away from combustion rather than into it. And so then I think there's a lot of game management that comes with that and the ability to hold the lead. Also, you have the moon in Gemini. The moon is square Saturn. So I think that the second half, again, is a lower scoring affair than the first half was. The ascendant, which is going to be the Bears, I see it as being ruled by Jupiter in Cancer. At that point, I think that they're very much in their feelings. And
Yeah.
being in the feelings doesn't necessarily work for a football team unless the football team is dominant and cohesive. And I don't see the Bears being dominant and cohesive with that Jupiter being in the eighth house. I think there's too much emotional turmoil going on. I know too much effort to try to make the really big plays and therefore not making the little plays that are successful in the end of the game. What
Yeah.
do you think?
I think all of that makes a lot of sense. Unfortunately, the in their feelings of it all is very
Yeah.
loud. I'm glad that we both picked up on that. I think it's important that they don't throw in the towel because they do have this new head coach that I think is likely going to be a good fit in the longer term. But I think that the head coach is also getting their footing, meaning for the Bears. I also appreciate the nuance that you're bringing that it's a lower scoring game. And you said that specifically with the moon square Saturn, right? Like the slowing down or like
Mhm.
the impeding almost of progress.
Yeah, and what's interesting about that, which is a topic that I was hoping we'd get to today, and I think this is a perfect intro if it's okay,
Yeah.
is what I tend to see is there's weekends when everything's getting blown out, and then there's weekends where everything's kind of like this grudge match, and there's a lot of low scoring games. And that moon square Saturn might make this one of those low scoring weekends. We
Okay.
we do have Jupiter sextile the sun, but the sun has already passed it. Mercury's already passed that Jupiter. So last week, the sun was approaching the Jupiter. 7 days ago, it was within a 5 degree orb in the approaching sextile, and we had a
Mhm.
lot of high scoring games in college football as well as in the NFL. And I think this week it switches into a low scoring game, and you'll see that maybe across the board. And this is a question I have for you, Jess, and I've
Sure.
really tried to contemplate that a lot is when you have these games being played at 1 o'clock Eastern time and then at 4 o'clock Eastern time, and
Yeah.
most of the games are being played at that time, the charts aren't that different for games.
Yeah, that's
So how do
true.
you work with that? Like if you're going to delineate, say, a West Coast game versus an East Coast game, but the teams basically have the same charts that are being played with.
Absolutely. I think that's a great question. And Frawley actually was addressing that in his text as well. He said, when it's the Super Bowl, it's very easy to predict because there's one game. But when there are loads and loads of games that are all within an hour or two of one another, it becomes kind of like negligible in terms of the difference. In my opinion, when we get into that realm, because the location is usually different, we can get some nuance in terms of like the degree of the descend or the ascendant, the degree of the midheaven. That's when I kind of bring out the fine tooth comb and like explore the symbolism as it exists, as it's appropriate, and just kind of see if there's anything a little bit more, I don't know, detailed that I can bring forward. I will say that in my own experience, the idea of it being a precise science gets a little bit dicey because when you do start stacking all of those games, there likely will be different outcomes. And so in my own practice, I may employ things like tarot. I may employ things like
Mm.
just my intuition and sort of like gut inclinations to help shape this story. But you could also, importantly, okay, just imagine if I could scroll simply. You can look at the event chart as it's impacting each of the team chart. Is that what you were thinking? Or is that
Well,
what
I
you
was about to ask you about that. I was like, hey, I know you have this approach, and I think it's
Mhm.
brilliant. I think it's genius.
So the downside is these are mostly noon charts. I think for
Hmm.
the Jacksonville Jaguars, there might be a little bit more of a precise time. But I've also noticed predicting off of the Eagles' original chart is the same as the Steelers. So that has been a journey to figure out. But often you can compare the event chart to the specific football team charts and get a sense of what the energy is. Now, I do want to make a very brief example based on last week's Monday game. So the Bears versus the Vikings. What I picked the Bears, and I knew it was going to be a close game. I thought it would be about a 3-point game. I believe it was. But when it's really close, I normally fudge it. I don't know if I'll be able to fix it, but that's the honest truth. And what I thought was the Bears would have the upper hand. However, the transiting sun was exactly on or within a couple of degrees of Saturn. And the middle chart here that we see, the innermost chart is the game we're looking at, but this middle wheel is the Bears. And so the sun illuminating Saturn, optimally, this would show where they've put forth work, where things are really starting to gel together, where they've matured. But less optimally, particularly with the co-presence of the South Node, is where they are really struggling, where they may find it's kind of like pushing a boulder uphill relentlessly and not really seeing the payoff. And of course, with that hard loss at the the end of the game, that was a little bit more reflective of the experience. And so in my own practice, I was like, gotta jot that down. We really should consider the event charts of the teams where possible. Did you have time to look at this?
Oh my God, I just got to say that that's absolutely brilliant, especially with that Saturn sitting opposed the lunar eclipse last week. And so Saturn represents the defense within a game chart,
Yeah,
and their defense just completely collapsed. It was eclipsed.
absolutely.
And it had been strong the entire time. And it
Hmm.
was actually like an eclipse because
Hmm.
it had been strong and it had been strong, and then it just completely disappeared
Totally.
as if the moon had just disappeared from the sky. So that's absolutely brilliant. I think that that is some insight that people could really learn from. And I just learned from it myself. So thank you. Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you enjoy it. Frawley
Yeah.
said, don't look at this. Don't look at individual players' charts because there's so many players on a football team.
Mhm.
Don't look at the event charts. I found this to be extremely valuable, and it kind of gives that extra edge, especially again, when we have a bunch of teams playing at a specific time and there's not that much difference in the event chart itself. One thing I do want to highlight in this, the outermost wheel is the Lions, the middle wheel, as I mentioned, is the Bears, and then this game chart we've been reflecting on is the innermost wheel. So we still see that there's actually a solar return impending for the Bears, which is interesting. But the South Node is still very close. Saturn, we are actively in an eclipse window. I don't know if they're going to be able to get it together, but they do have a new head coach, and that's the journey is unfolding. And so part of the solar return may be that they start to have, well, first and foremost, very fated events because this is happening during an eclipse window, but some momentum in terms of support for their overall process. Now, what I do like just very briefly about the lines is they're in the Venus return window. Usually when I look at these charts, I look at Mars, I'll look at Saturn, I'll look at the sun. Venus is like negligible in terms of impact. Mercury can be useful just in terms of seeing speed, effectiveness, delivery, things like that. But I do think that this is sort of a nice, like, benefic wink. We also see that the transiting Jupiter is past the exact conjunction here. Last week it was more exact and it wasn't especially good for the Lions, but I'm hoping that some of this Jupiter return and broader Jupiter conjunction signatures, energies help to bolster their performance in a sweeping sense.
Yeah, so that sun conjoining Jupiter, is that right? Like up here, the sun.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I think that's great. I really feel that's a very strong prop to them. Speaking of prop, then I'd like to consider some prop bets. I do think the over on the yards for Jared Goff is a good way to go. I feel like he's going to have one of those games where he just airs it out and he connects and it works, especially through the first half, which I think is enough for him to hit that point. I believe the over is 250 yards, quite a lot, but I could see Jared Goff hitting that. Then also, when it comes to the game, I wouldn't necessarily take the over on running backs, stretching that this game, because to me, it looks like a lot of the energy of the game itself is going to be trying to make air yards. So it's going to be a quick game in that way. And there'll be frustrations on the ground. Yeah.
Absolutely. That's excellent. Do you want to talk about our final predictions or are there other
Yeah,
things?
let's talk about the final prediction.
So
Hmm.
this is what I have. So Frawley said that the underdog was going to win. The testimony for that is not especially strong, and I might be reaching with the first assumption of Moon in the seventh house, despite it not being very close to the descendant. But Frawley's method seems to say the Bears will win. I think the Lions will win. I want it to be a high scoring game.
Oh, yeah.
But
Yes,
I
you
feel
do.
like, I mean, that's pretty high. So, that might be a little bit out of touch, but I do think the Lions will win ultimately.
Yeah, I'm going with the Lions again using the Bonatti's method of the Lions are going to be the seventh house, then the Bears are going to be the first house, and the planet ruling the seventh house in both halves has greater dignity than the planet ruling the first house in both halves, which is the essence of what we're looking for there. I also do think that the over is a good way to go here. And again, I would say taking Jared Goff to make over 250 yards it's a reasonable bet. It's a reasonable bet. And so that's where I would fall with it. Um, I think last week we did pretty good. I think also Frawley's method predicted last week that the Cowboys would win.
Yes.
So then, Frawley, maybe it works better on soccer matches. I don't know. Yeah. Yeah.
It's
Excellent. What's that?
it's going to be interesting to see how it holds up across the season because as of now I'm just like, well, I appreciate the extra context and there's a lot of considerations I wouldn't have calculated myself, but if it's not useful, I don't know if I would employ it in my own work for Frawley's method. But I do appreciate it. I appreciate that there's some tradition to work from.
Yeah, yeah, there is. And one thing that's interesting about his method is he sounds like he's trying to simplify it.
He
Like he's
is
really trying to
heavily,
simplify it down.
heavily, and it's not simple.
No, it's not
It just isn't.
because and that might be part of why it might not work as well for football. I mean, with football, you've got 12 men on each side of the game, so that's like 11 men on each side of the field. You got 22 people out there, plus you have the referees, plus you have the huge coaching staff. So there's a degree of complexity to what is being navigated in a football game. That is a little bit more than what you might find in a baseball game or a soccer game in terms of the interchanging parts through the entire game itself. And I would say, like, you do focus on a player, like knowing what the quarterback is, what his condition is, really can make a difference. If you can find the quarterback's birth date and you see that he's having a hard transit that day, it is 9 out of 10 times safe to take a bet against that team
Yeah.
because he is having an emotional experience of having to look at how life is not easy and the work he has to do in order to succeed during the game itself. And so I would disagree also a little bit with Frawley on like, well, I don't go and look at the players. They do look at the players. Also, do look at when the team's origins happen. Because, like we just noticed today, and you put up with this example, if eclipses are striking a pivotal planet, let's see, so that's Saturn for the Bears. And the
Mhm.
Bears, the Ascendant, that's going to be their second house, which is their wealth and what they're doing. So then that, your wealth is your productivity, right?
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
so if you have an eclipse striking the planet, ruling your productivity, how's that going to affect your productivity? The way we saw it in the last game was they were very productive, and then suddenly they couldn't be productive at all.
Yeah.
So then I would say also your insight in like looking up at these charts is really important. And it's one thing to, try to guess the outcome as we're doing for fun. There are people who do put money on games. And if you're putting a money on a game, then you really want to look at all the different factors. And yet still
Yes.
you have to somehow distill it down into what is the simple answer.
Yeah.
And in this case, the simple answer is, well, Detroit's going to win.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm with
Yeah.
you there.
Yeah.
And let's hope they do.
Hopefully next week when we do the review, we're like, yes, we got it again.
That would be a good run to start the season with, for sure.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you very much, Jess. Illuminating as always. I find
Thank
your
you.
your brain is masterful in dissecting the chart, and hopefully, people who are following along are learning something from you. And if there are people who decide that they want to play with a little type of money here or there, then hopefully they're winning a little money. Of course, gambling is always a dangerous thing. It's an addictive thing. It's something that should not be done with anything other than money that you can afford to lose. So please do not take our advice. Do your own research, do your own studies on how this works, and may you have success in your sports endeavors.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you and see you later.